What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Panuta for tutorialsEU. In this video, you are going to learn how to build the bad game with Unity and C#. So bad game, you might think, what the hell is that? Well, it is a game which is actually quite good, but it has this funny name that Dani came up with. And Dani is a YouTuber who is very successful with his channel, and I really like his content, I really appreciate him. And he has created this bad game within 30 minutes. Well, he created the core features of it in 30 minutes and then he improved it a little bit and then added it to the Play Store. And you can check it out, the link is in the description. But what you can also do is you can learn how to build that game. And that's what you're going to do in this video. So I'm going to teach you how to build the fundamental features, like the core game mechanics and all of that of the bad game. And yeah, you can just follow along. You can of course also download the source code in the description. It's not the one from the bad game of Dani, it's our own. We have pretty much prepared the game. And I hope Dani isn't angry at me for doing that, but you can of course build it with us. So just follow along. I will explain every step along the way. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to get notified once that happens. And also don't forget to leave a like, because if you smash that like button, that helps not only the YouTube video with this algorithm that there is in the background, but it also helps me to understand that you really like the game development content, so that I need to create more of that. Because as you might know, on this YouTube channel I'm teaching many different areas. Python is one of them, machine learning is in there, Android development, game development, C# development. So these are mainly my areas or my expertise, so to speak. And if you want to know more of a specific area, you have to hit that like button, hit it really hard. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to check out the link in the description, because there I teach you the fundamentals of C#. So if you don't know C# yet, this video is going to be too tough for you, so you should at least know C#. There is a YouTube video that I created for the C# fundamentals, but you can also check out the whole C# masterclass that I created. It's also a link in the description. You can get a huge discount for that, and there you learn the fundamentals of C# and game development with Unity, where you will learn how to build 3 amazing games. So first of all Pong, then a zigzag endless runner, and a beautiful Fruit Ninja slash and dash game. So good stuff there. Alrighty, so now let's have a look at what we are going to build, because we are going to build quite some cool stuff. So we're going to build this bad game X, not to mistake it with bad game. And yeah, shout out to all the boners and Milk Gang. Now we're going to build it in 2 parts. So we're going to build this game in 2 parts. Actually it's 3 parts, but 2 parts will be available on YouTube. And first of all, we're going to build this part here, where we basically have the grappling functionality and the menu. So we can just go ahead and play. We can turn on sound and all of that. So the grappling system is what we're gonna build as of now. And maybe I should change the color of the hook, but that's basically up to you later on how you want to play it. Okay, so that is the game that we're gonna build in this video, or within the next 2 hours. That's what you're gonna build, including the menu. So the menu is gonna take quite a part in that. So if you don't want to build the whole menu and settings, you can of course download it and then just go to the part in which you're going to actually build the game mechanics. Okay, feel free to do that if you want to. The resources will be down in the description, and I'd say let's have a look at what we're going to build in the next video, which will come out next week. So make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you will be notified about that. And also, if you like that video, I will know that I should create more Unity related stuff. So here we also have this beautiful bad game X, and X gonna give it to you. We're gonna play it, and now we can see that we can hook around, and the map is auto generated. We can fly through hooks. We can get points by flying through it, and we can even have combos later on, but for now we can just fly through the stuff. And we can also lose by going to the ground. So there is a game over. You did. You can see the kills, distance, score. Well, distance is not implemented at that point. We have some money collected, which we then can later on spend. So this part of spending and upgrading your whole game, so allowing the user to upgrade, or the player to upgrade all of the different functionality of the game. That is something that we will do in a paid course. So I will build a course just doing that and a bunch of other games. Okay, so you will learn everything on top of that. So this is what you get for free on YouTube, but everything on top of that, which includes the upgrades and even more advanced features which will come, that will be available in a course, and you have impact on what will be in that course. So really make sure to comment what kind of game you would like to have, or like the ones that are there, because this is for me an indication that these are the games that I should record, that I should build in such a fashion, in such a video. Quick pause. I built this complete Unity masterclass course in which you are going to learn how to build real games and how to build them from scratch. So you're going to learn how to build a platformer game, how to build a Space Invaders clone, how to build a Fruit Ninjas clone and optimize it for mobile and export it for mobile as well, how to build a first-person shooter game, and finally how to build a tycoon game similar to Adventurist, which is an endless game. So if you want to become a real game developer, definitely check out the course. You can find the link in the description and you will get the course with a huge discount, so don't hesitate, as you will not only get the course, but you will also get it in a structured manner with all of the code, as well as a Q&A section with a 5-star support. So get the course now. I hope to see you there. So let's get started with building this awesome little game. And once again, shout out to Dani and his boners. Thanks a lot for being here, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. So get your glass of milk and let's get started. As you might have guessed it, we are going to use Unity in order to build this game. And in order to install Unity, in case you haven't installed it yet, you can just search for install Unity Hub and then go to docs.unity3d.com, or you can just follow the guide that you can find here. But I'm basically just expecting you to understand how to install a software, because if you can't do that, then you're probably not the right person to build a video game. Okay, so install Unity Hub, and then once you have installed it, you can go over to Unity Hub itself and add Unity to your PC. All right, so now once Unity is on your PC, you can have a different version than I do, but it should be newer than the one I use here. So let's just go ahead and create a new project, and I'm just gonna go ahead and create a new project for my latest Unity version that I've installed here. And I'm going to use the 2D template because we are building a 2D game. And I'm going to call this one Bad Game Clone. Then you can select the location where you want to store that game. And I'm just gonna click Create. This will then, of course, take a little while until the project is ready. Now that the project is ready, we can go ahead and make some changes. So for example, I'm going to change the name of the scene. So I'm going to save it as, and I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to save it in the scenes folder, and the name will be main menu scene, because we are going to build the main menu first before we go into the actual grappling and so forth. All right, so let's create the scene. Now let's go to scenes. You can see we have the main menu scene now, and we have the sample scene. And you can play around here with the size of the elements. I'm going to make it rather big. So now I have this main menu scene here. Okay, the next step that we will need to take is to add a canvas to this scene. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new canvas in here, which is under UI canvas. All right, so now we have a canvas, and we can see that here we have certain components in the canvas. You can see it's a little bigger than our main camera view. You can see this one is quite small, but the actual canvas is always big because it just overlaps. Now I want to make some changes to this canvas. I'm just going to go here to the right-hand side, and I want to use the screen space camera. And the render camera should be our main camera. So I'm going to drag that in there. And then in the canvas scaler, I'm going to make some changes as well. So I'm going to say scale with screen size, and the reference resolution should be 1920 by 1080 in our case. All right, so your settings should be pretty much the same as they are for me here.
by doing that, by the way, the UI will scale with the size of the screen. So it will be working on different screen sizes. And that's something that is very helpful and useful when you work with mobile phones, because they have very different screen sizes. All right, next I want to create a new element. So I'm going to click here, create UI, and then I'm going to select image. As you can see, it automatically created this image within the canvas, because the canvas takes care of our UI elements, and an image that we enter or add to the game directly via this approach will be inside of the canvas. Now I'm going to change the name of this image. I'm going to call this one background image. Here at the very top, you can change the name anytime inside of the inspector. So select the image and then change the name here. Then I would also like to change the settings hereby, as I want to stretch this image. So you can click on this center middle area here and then stretch towards both directions. At least that's what I want to have here. Okay, so left 0, top 0, as well as right and bottom, they should also all be set to 0. And then I'm going to change the color to being a black background color. So just click on color and then drag down here, or you can enter value 000 with A being 255. So this is the RGB value, red, green, blue value, which then creates the color in the end. If you now check your game mode, you can see that you have a black background. All right, now let's create a little text. So we can do that directly in the canvas. I'm going to create a new text here, or you could have gone to this plus sign, UI text. That's also an option that you have there. So here, UI text. And I'm going to call this text game name text. And the actual game name will be Bad Game Clone. All right, so you enter that right here. You can change the position around a little bit. So I'm going to say that the text should be anchored towards the top center. So that will make a difference here. Let's go to game mode to actually see that. You can see here Bad Game Clone. So it's centered towards the top, and you can see the position automatically has changed here. So I'm just going to set that at -120, which will put it at further to the top here. And the width should be 600. The height will be 200. So I'm going to have a rather big text here. And then the text color, of course, will have to be changed as well. So I want to use a white text color here. And then here, select the white color. So in my case, once I click on to this field, you can see it's disappearing. And that makes it a little more difficult, but that seems to be a little bug. So if you can select it, otherwise you can just go over a white part of the screen and that will make it white then. Then I want to make sure that I align by geometry, and I use best fit here. So you can see now the text is significantly bigger than it was before. Now I will change the max size here to 100. Okay, so I have Bad Clone here. Now this is a little bit unfitting, so maybe I should call it Bad Game X. Then I have enough space there. Bad Game X. So now it's a little better here when it comes to the positioning. Okay, so you have, of course, many different options. I'm going to align it to the center here and align it to the center here as well. So in both cases, the paragraph is aligned now. So you can play around with the values. You can get this same result when it comes to the looks in different ways. So depending on how you want to play around with the text value, you can do so. In the end, it has to fit your preference, so it has just to look good for you. And by the way, I'm also going to make this bold so that it's thicker. All right, next we are going to create another text. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new UI text here. This one will be called, and let's go all the way up here. This one will be total money display text. And we are going to position this or anchor this towards the top right. Now the position should be -160, -40. The width is going to be 320 to 80. Then we need to make some more changes here to the text itself. So I'm just going to say at the beginning we have $0 with 3 zeros, and then I'm going to make this bold as well. I'm going to center or align the text and align by geometry as well, best fit, and I'm going to use the same values that we had before. All right, so we have this dollar there at the top hand corner, and I'm going to use white here as well. So now you see it seems to work for this time. So we have this white text, and this is how it's going to look. So we have the dollars there at the very top. Alrighty, next let's add a button. So I'm going to go to UI and I'm going to select button from here. So here I'm going to make some changes to the settings. So I'm going to center this button towards the X position, and towards Y I'm going to push it a little bit to the top. So it's going to be higher than the central point. All right, and then I want to have the, and by the way, to get here, you can simply double click the canvas and then you see the whole canvas in your scene view. Okay, so that's how you can get to the screen. Now let's change this button up a little bit more. So I'm going to give it a name here. I'm going to call this one play button. And this play button should also have a slightly different appearance. So I'm going to not use the actual image here. So I'm just going to get rid of this whole image. So let's deactivate it. You can see now we don't have any image here, but what I want to have is a text that is bigger. So in order to change the text, you have to open the play button in your hierarchy here on the left hand side. You go to the text itself, and then you can make changes to the text. And the text is going to be play. Other settings that I want to make here is, first of all, I want to make the font bold, and then I'm going to change the font size to 27. It's going to be rich text. It's going to be centered, and I'm going to best fit it. So align to by geometry and best fit it to the maximum size of 258. Okay, so that's going to be the setting that I'm going to use. The text color should be white. So I'm going to use 255, 255, and 255, because for some reason, otherwise this window didn't work for me correctly. All right. Now here, of course, you have multiple different options. So what I did is I changed the text size, and I'm going to also change the button size, because the play button itself is a little too small for my feeling. So I'm going to change that to being a width of 800 and a height of 100. Okay, so now if we scroll out, we can see that this is the whole button area. It's way wider than the actual text. So the user can also click here and we would still get into the play mode. Okay, and now what we can do is we can duplicate that button. So copy and paste multiple times. So I'm going to have 3 buttons underneath one another, and then I'll have a button at the bottom here and at the bottom right here. So this one will not be play button. So the second button, I'm going to call it the shop button. Okay, so let's rename it here, call it shop button. And then let's change the position of it as well. So the shop button should be at -60. Then I'm going to change the text of the shop button. So here it should say shop. All right, then the other button, the customize button, I'm going to add that one in here as well. And I'm going to call this one customize button. All right, and the position will be -230. Okay, so now I just need to change the name of that text, and I'm going to call this one customize. Now I want to have a settings button at the bottom left hand side, and in order to get that, I can just drag this button here towards, actually not this one, but the play button. 3, I'm going to drag this towards the bottom left here. And let's see how it looks. Well, it's way too wide. So let's make some changes. So it should be aligned to the bottom left or anchored towards the bottom left. That's why I want to have it. And from that perspective, it should have the position of 150 for the X value and 80 for the Y value. But then of course the width and height are way too big. So let's change it to 250 times 80. And then we'll need to give it a different name as well. Settings button. So I'm going to call this one. I'm going to change the text to setting. Okay, so now we can change the settings with this button. Okay, now let's duplicate this button once again, copy paste. And now this one should be anchored towards the bottom right hand side. And then of course we need to change the position to something like -150. So now it will be on the bottom right hand side. Now, of course, what we can do is we can change the text here to exit. And now you guessed it, this is not the settings button, it's going to be the exit button. All right, so that is our user interface as of now. Now let's go ahead and put all of those elements into a separate game object, because I want to put them into a folder so that I can make them invisible once we go into the settings window. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new empty object within the canvas. And that one will be where we position all of our elements that should be visible in this screen, right? So it's the game name text. And well, I think we can leave the total money. Well, actually we can put that in there as well. So depending on what you want to put in there, you can put it all in this folder game object. And I'm going to change the name to main menu panel. All right, so this is one way of doing it. Of course, you could have also gone ahead and created a panel by using this approach. But either way, what you can do now is you can click on this game object and you can make it invisible. So we can do that programmatically later on. Once we click on the settings button, we can make this one invisible and then make the settings view visible. Of course, don't forget from time to time to save your scene, because if you should close your application or it should crash or anything, then the scene will not be stored and it will be gone. So really make sure that you make a change, save a change. So each time you make a bigger change, then save it. All right, and the next step would be to create this screen that you have here. So with all of the settings, just make sure that fast, good, off, on are buttons, as well as back is also a button. The rest are text elements. So you can try to create this yourself and it can look as you want it. And as you can see, we are using a different font here. So we will also need to import a font, which we're going to do in a minute. But if you're too lazy, you can of course open up Unity a second time and you can then create a prefab. So I have my prepared project here. So what I can do is I can just go ahead and drag the settings panel here, and then it will be a prefab, right? So now I can go ahead and drag that prefab into my other project, into the project that I'm currently building. And there I can now drag it into my canvas. So this settings panel. Then I need to make sure that I unpack it completely. So I will unpack this prefab completely. Then I can make this main menu panel invisible and make this settings panel visible. Now, as I said, we are using a different font here for the settings panel. That's why I need to make sure that I have the font available, because if you look in the title text, it says font is missing. That's why you don't see anything here. So now let's get the font into our game as well. Therefore, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call this one fonts. And this is where I'm going to drag in the font. Now I'm going to use the built tilting BD font, but you can use any font you like. You just need to make sure that you own the rights to use this font in a commercial project. So please use your own font here instead of using this particular font that I'm using, and then you're good to go. Okay, so now in the settings, it says font is missing. So I'm gonna have to change that for every single one of the texts that we have. So here I'm going to assign this little text that I have here for every button as well, I'm going to assign this font. This is a little bit of work, unfortunately, but that's how it is sometimes, right? So here we have another font missing, and so font. Of course, you can skip this part if you don't want to watch me do that. By the way, I'm going to also add this font to my other UI elements, so to the main menu panel, because here I am using Arial as of now, but I want to change that. So I'm going to use Build Tilting BD for all of the text elements in the main menu panel as well. So they look the same. It's very useful and very important actually to do that, because otherwise your application or your game will look inconsistent, and that's something that you don't want to have. Okay, so let's use this here, and there we are. Okay, now you can play around and see, okay, so this is the settings panel. You can make it invisible by clicking this little icon here at the top by using this checkbox here, and you can make the main menu panel visible again by ticking the box. Okay, so they shouldn't be both active at the same time. All right, now let's go back to our assets, and here we're going to create a new folder, which I'm going to call scripts. And now inside of the scripts folder, I'm going to create a new script. So here I'm going to select C# script, and I'm going to call this one main menu script. And then once it's there, we can double click it, and that should open up our editor. In my case, it's Visual Studio 2019, but it could be any editor that you have selected to be your main editor. For Mac users, this will probably be Mono Behavior, but of course there you can also install Visual Studio. Okay, so this main menu script will take care of the main menu functionality, because I want to be able to interact with my main menu. And if you want to give your looks or your game any kind of functionality, you can do that via code. And that's really the power of code. That's where it comes in. So we have two methods here directly in our main menu script class. So we have this class, which is public, so it's available from other classes as well. And it inherits from Mono Behavior, which means it inherits from this class called Mono Behavior, which in turn has a lot of code in there which we reuse. So basically we're just saying, okay, we're using this script, which is of type Mono Behavior. And in there we have this start method, which is called before the first frame of update. So basically when our object is ready, start will be called. So once it's ready inside of the game, and then update will be called every single frame. So now what we need to do is we need to import a namespace. So the namespace that we're going to use is Unity engine.ui. And we need to finish this with a semicolon. So that will allow us to use UI elements inside of this code and access them directly and use some of the functionality or its functionality, which is pretty useful. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to debug. So I'm going to say debug.log hi all, or hi everyone, I'm Dennis. So you can write here whatever you want, but I'm just going to write that, and I'm going to use debug.log. Then within brackets and within those apostrophes here, I enter the text here. So I'm just going to say, hi everyone, I'm Dennis. Okay, so whatever text you have here will then be displayed in the console. So let's save that real quick and go back to our project and now run our project. Just to see if anything is happening, we can see nothing is happening. So why is nothing happening? Well, because we haven't used that script. So now we need to make sure that this script is in fact added to one of our objects, which will be loaded in this main menu scene. So let's take care of that. Let's go ahead and create an empty object here, which I'm going to call script manager, because that's going to take care of the scripts. So I'm going to drag the script that we just created, this one here, this main menu script, onto the script manager. Okay, once you do that, you can double click on the script manager and you will see here on the right hand side that in the inspector, suddenly we have this main menu script, which we now can use. Which means that our script manager will be an instance which has the main menu script, which will then run the code that is inside of the script. And the code that is inside of the script is that code here, which basically just will say debug log, hi everyone, I'm Dennis. So now let's run our code again and see if we can see anything in the console, and we can see here, hi everyone, I'm Dennis is debugged or written onto our console. All right, and at that point, let's save our scene once again, and we can now move on.
All right, so now you've been around for half an hour roughly. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to smash that like button really hard, and also hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you will be notified once there is another video of those games that I was talking about. And also make sure to leave a comment about the game that you would like to see how it's developed, so that I know which ones are the ones that are most interesting for my audience. All right, so leave a like and like the comments that fit to your preference. So for example, if somebody says, I want to know how to build Angry Birds, then very easy, hit that button, that like button on the comment, and I will know that this is the kind of stuff that you want. By the way, I have prepared this game already, so if you like that, that would really be great for me, because I don't have to build everything from scratch again. But there are other games as well. So good stuff. I know that 3D shooters are always interesting. So first-person shooters, I have something prepared there already as well. So that could be an option. Or maybe a racing game, which I have not prepared yet, but that would be funny. Think about what you would like to build and leave a comment.
All right, so now let's make this look a little cooler, because as it is, we have this black background and it's not very appealing, but we can change that quite quickly. So we can just create a new particle system here, which I'm gonna call BG particle system. So I'm gonna change the name here, BG underscore particle system. All right, and then I'm going to make some changes to the position. So I'm gonna position it at 0, -6, and Z position will be 0 as well. And you can see now we have this beautiful little particle system, and it's creating a bunch of particles for us. All right, so that by itself is already cool, but now let's make it even cooler by changing some of the settings here. So you can see here in the particle system, there are a bunch of changes that you can make. So for example, we can change the duration of the particle system. We can change the looping. So for example, now it's just going to create one iteration, but if I start looping, then it will play again and again and again. I can also change the start delay, so how many seconds we want to wait until it actually starts, or we can do something even cooler. We can change the lifetime. So here the lifetime is always 5 seconds, but I can give it a random value. So I can just change it here, random between two constants. So I can just say, okay, the values should be between 1 and 5 seconds. So you can see some of them live longer than others. Some disappear while they are in there. Okay, so that's something you can play around with. I'm just going to use a constant for the lifetime. I'm just going to set that to 15 seconds. But what I will change is the start speed. I will say that it should be significantly slower because it's super fast now. So it should be between 0.5 and 1. Okay, so you can see now the particles stay a little longer. It takes a lot longer for them to move around and all of that. Then we can also change the rotation. So I want to have a start rotation, and that should also be random between 1 and 90 degrees. So let's do that. You can see now the particles will turn a little bit, which is cool. Then I'm also going to change the start color, because currently they are all white, right? So if we look at it, they're all white. Now let's change that. Let's give it a color that is random. So I'm going to use two random, or random between two gradients. Okay, so it's going to start with one value here. Let's say something like an orange or so, or something here. And then we have another value here. So you can click on those elements, right? And that will then change the color. So here you can then change the color, and I'm going to use something purplish. So you can see now this is how the color is moving. You can also change this part here at the top. You can change the alpha and all of those kind of things. So you can see here in the background how this already shapes our particle system in the background, which is pretty cool. Okay, so then this color, let's change that to be something like bluish, turning into something orange-ish. Okay, so it's always relative here, at least for a man. They all look the same, right? So you can see we have this particle system here in the background, and those particles fly around and they're pretty cool. What's really important is that play on awake is active. So here, play on awake. And that I also reduce the maximum amount of particles, because this is fine on a PC, but maybe on a mobile phone it's not going to be as good. It's not going to work as well. So I'm going to limit that to 500 maximum particles at the same time. You can limit that even further depending on the device, and we will see how we can change settings later on as well. Then there is start size here, which is currently set to 1. I want to set that to be between 0.05 and 0.25. So now it will be significantly smaller. Then I will change the shape in a second, but now let's look at the emission. So the emission is how many particles are generated per second. So you can play around with the values here if you want to make any changes to that. Then you can see shape is also active. So you can see there are a bunch of settings which you can change, but shape is active, for example, and currently it's in a cone. But I would like to change that. I would like this to be an edge. So let's do that. Now the radius is 1. And let's change the radius to being 3. The mode should be random. And I'm going to change the scale to 555. And now if I do that, you can see that I get a little problem because all of them are on this line. And that has to do with my rotation being -90. So let me set that to 0 here, the rotation of the particle system. And you will see that now it goes all the way. So you can now play around with this. You can see maybe the radius of 3 is too much. Maybe something like 2 should be enough. Well, you can see 2 is just enough. So it's just at the edges. You could be even more precise here so that they are within exactly the width of your screen. So you can see here 1.8 in my case is a good value. And you can see this is how it then looks in game mode. Now you can also change the size over time. So here we have a bunch of options, right? So I'm just gonna change the size over time here. And you can see now currently it's smaller at the beginning and it gets bigger towards the end. And I can change that. So I can change the curve, I can click on it and I can drag it around. So now I'm just changing the value here. Now I'm changing the size from being bigger at the beginning towards being smaller towards the end. So they disappear, so to speak, towards the end. Now you can also change the rotation over time. So if you want to change that, you can play around with that value. Rotation by speed, so it should rotate depending on the speed. You can change that. So for example, if you want to have an angular velocity between 0 and 45 degrees, you can change that and it will change the direction in which they fly by the speed. All right, so at this point, what you can do is you can go ahead and create a new folder called materials. And inside of that folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new material. Who would have guessed it? And I'm going to call this one particle underscore material. And this particle material should have a different shader. So I'm going to change the shader. And you can see there are many different shaders that you can use here. And I'm just going to keep it super simple. I'm just going to use it as a sprite shader. And I'm going to say it should be default. Now you can change the color here or the tint. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that material onto my particle system. And now you can see we have this not so beautiful anymore, but a lot more fitting particle system, because now we have cubes everywhere, and in the BAD game we play with cubes, and hooks are cubes and everything is cubes pretty much. So that's what we're going to do here. We have this particle system out of cubes. Okay, so if we play that now, we will see that it basically just over time generates those beautiful little particles coming from the bottom. And at one point we can then of course press play. Well, we're not there yet, but later on we will add that functionality. All right, so that's how you can create such a particle system. Don't forget to save your scene, because otherwise it might be gone if you forget to save that and you close your Unity. So really be sure to save it. And as I said, play around with those values a little bit. As you can see, there are significantly more settings available here. Size by speed, color by speed, color over lifetime. So you can really make a lot of changes here. You can add noise. You can see here now we have a lot of noise, so that can be cool. You can play around with the noise and so forth. External forces, that sounds pretty cool. So you can change some external forces. Maybe a wind blows from the side or something like that. Okay, so play around with that, get a feeling for it, and then we're good to go for the next step. All right, and now we can go ahead and add some sound to our project. So let's do that real quick. And we need to get started by creating a sound manager first. So we have this script manager, right? And now we're going to do the same thing for a sound manager. So I'm going to create an empty object. I'm going to call this one sound manager. And now I'm going to create a bunch of audio sources. So here I can go ahead and create a right-click audio source. Okay, so now I have this audio source here. And I can give it a name. So a good name for an audio source is starting with AS, standing for audio source, underscore, and then this one will be background music. Then I'm going to copy and paste that multiple times here. So then I will replace this with AS UI click sound. So if you click anything on the UI, you want to have a sound, then I will have one for player hit sound. Here I'll have player die sound, then player grappling. So each time that we're grappling something with our grappling gun, and then coin collect, each time we collect something, and then finally enemy blast. So once we blast through an enemy. Okay, so these are all of the sounds that we are going to need. So these are the different audio sources. Now you can see that there is no audio clip. So these audio sources, they will not play any sound because we don't have an audio clip assigned to them. And that's something that we would have to do here if we wanted to run anything when these audio sources are triggered. So by the way, you can assign an audio source or attach an audio source to a game object, and that will then play the background in a 3D environment. So depending on where the object is in the 3D world, that could then create a 3D audio listening experience. Okay, but as we are using a 2D game, it will always come from the sound manager's position. But if you wanted to have the sound specifically coming from the position of the player, you could assign the player sound or whatever to the player element, even though in our main menu scene that will not be necessary because we don't have any specific player in our main menu scene. So now you will need to find sounds and drag them as audio clips, and there are different types of audio clips available. You can check out the asset store for audio if you want to get it from there, or you can search the internet. The only thing that you really need to make sure is that you don't use audio elements that you don't own or that aren't royalty free for your application. So you always need to make sure that you have the usage rights for such a audio and also the right to distribute it, because I don't have the right to distribute the music that I'm using in this particular example. I'm not going to share the audio with you, but I'm going to use it. So you can just import it from the asset store and use the audio clips, or as I said, you can download them. Some of the audio that I'm using comes from this website here, Ashamalue Music. So you can find a lot of different background music from here. You just need to make sure that you don't distribute the music, or that you don't play it on YouTube, for example, without having the rights to do so. But as I said, there are a bunch of other alternatives. So you have royalty-free music, which you may use, but then you always have to make sure that the usage rights are fine for that, okay? So here, most of the times you will find something like terms of use. So if you want to know more about that, or you can directly ask the person who offers the music. So I'm just going to drag the audio that I have in my other project. I'm going to drag it in here, and these are the different sounds that I have, and now I can assign them. So for example, as the background sound, I'm going to use this trap music from Asha Malwev music. All right, so here background music, drag it as an audio clip in there. Then UI click, you can have the click sound. Then player hit, you can use player hit. So it always makes sense to have useful names here that really make sense. So player died, player grappling, so grapple, and coin collect will be the coin sound, enemy blast will be the explosion sound. Okay, so now we have a bunch of sounds that should work for our sound manager. Now, of course, we need to make sure that those sounds are triggered and played. And in order to do so, we need to create a new script. So let's go to scripts again. Let's create a new C# script here. And let's call it sound manager script. Okay, now let's drag that to our sound manager itself. So I'm going to drag that onto the sound manager, and you can see now it's available here, and I'm going to open that script here. So I will need to create the audio source variables, okay, because I want to access every single audio source through this sound manager script. And I prepared the code here, so I don't have to type it all in and bore you with that. You can pause the video if you want to type everything manually. You can see here I called one of them background music, then we have the UI button click sound, we have the player hit sound, player died sound, player grappling sound, coin collect sound, and enemy blast sound. So the 7 sounds that we had before, I have all of them. Okay, now instead of using the start method, I'm going to use the awake method here. Okay, so I'm going to use awake. Awake is the right method to prepare audio sounds, and that's what I'm going to do here. If you want to know specifically the difference between awake and start, you can always Google these kind of information. You can see here what's the general use of awake, start, update, fixed update, late update, and there are great answers for that. Okay, so you can even look into the documentation for that. You can see in docs, you will find awake. Awake is called when the script instance is being loaded. So it is used to initialize any variables or game state before the game starts. And it is only called once during the lifetime of the script instance, which is great because that's exactly what we need with our sound manager script. Okay, so now I will create an instance of our sound manager. So here I'm going to create a public static sound manager, and I'm going to call this one instance. Okay, make it static so that I don't need to create an object of the sound manager in order to use it in my project. And I make it public so that I can use it from everywhere. So this means that I will be able to use the sound manager in different classes and trigger some of the sounds from there. So I can actually call it from other scripts later on. So we will use this to access public variables and methods of this script in any other script. So that's what this instance will be for. All right, and now I will create a singleton. So I'm going to create this function called make singleton. And actually it's a method because it's in our class. But anyways, what I do with this is I check if the instance is not null, which means this instance object that we have here has something in it. If that's the case, then destroy the current game object, which means the new sound manager script. So the idea behind this is that you don't want to have multiple sound managers inside of your project, because that would create something a very weird situation where you have the sound coming up twice. Okay, you can have multiple sound manager objects in your project, but they will have to each be taking care of a separate task, right? but usually you shouldn't really have that. So you have one sound manager, and that takes care of the sound. And inside of that sound manager, you have all of the code, but you don't want to have two sound managers, so that when you play a sound, that it doesn't play twice, or doesn't play twice at the same time, pretty much, and create this weird effect. Okay, so we just say, okay, if there is an instance already, don't create a new one. Just delete this object that you're trying to create. But if there is no instance yet, then this object that we currently have, which means this sound manager object that we just created, will be the instance for our instance variable. Okay, so we just say this is equal to instance. And then we have this little line of code here, which is a predefined method that we can reuse. It's made available by the Unity namespaces, and what it says is don't destroy on load, which means that don't destroy this game object when you load a new scene. So when you move from one scene to another. When would we do that? Well, when we move from, for example, the menu over to the game, or when we lose and we go from the game back to the menu. Okay, we don't want to destroy the sound manager and create a new one every time. We want to have one sound manager and nothing more than that, or no more than one sound manager. The concept of this is called singleton. So instance is one name. Maybe you find this as singleton in other situations, but basically it's the same concept. So this instance is a singleton, which means it's only available once in the whole application or the whole program. So this is the singleton pattern. It's the way to ensure that a class has only a single globally accessible instance available at all times. So it's behaving much like a regular static class, but with some advantages. And this is very useful for making global manager types, such as, for example, our sound manager, later on our game manager, and so forth. All right, so the next thing that I want to have is options to turn on sound and turn off the sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create getters and setters. So here I have set music, I have get music, I have set sound and get sound. So I have getters and setters for my sound. And what I do here is I say player prefs.setInt music on off is on. So this one here is an integer which is either 1 or 0. So 1 being on, 0 being off. Okay, you could of course set a boolean as well. Alternatively here, it really depends on your preference. Okay, so a boolean would be true or false. You can do the same thing with int being 0 and 1. Okay, so we're just saying the music is on or it is off, and we store it in our player prefs. So player prefs is a way to store very little bits of information, such as settings. So that's why it's called player prefs, standing for player preferences. So we can store player preferences in there, and that will be permanently stored. So when we come back to the application, it will know if the sound was turned on or off, or the music was turned on or off. So we do that with the music. So we set the music, and with the get music, we can get back if the sound is turned on or is turned off, because based on that information, we want to play sound or we want to not play sound, or we want to play music or not play music. So basically these are the settings that we have here that we can then change with calling these methods. So calling this method and that method, and we can get the settings by calling these two methods here, get music and get sound. Okay, so at the beginning, for the very first time that we start this application, so we start our game the very first time, we will not have any settings there. So if that's the case, then we want to set the settings. We will set the settings to be turned on. So I'm just going to add this start method here, and it checks if the player prefs does not have the key first time sound check, because I'm using this key. So this key value pair usually is how you can store data. So you store it at a position, which is the key, and you store a specific value, which is the value that comes afterwards. So here with set int, for example, the key is music on off, and the value is 1. Okay, so we're checking does the position first time sound check have an entry, or if there's an entry for that specific string, for that key. So if there's no entry in our player preferences, then we want to set the music on off as 1, so turn it on, and the same for the sound. And then we also make sure that the setInt first time sound check is actually available. So next time that we start this application, we will check this again, but this time it does exist. So we directly go to the next line. We don't execute this code again. So we don't turn on the music every time that we restart the application, but we actually make it dependent on what the user has entered the last time, or what are the settings that he has. All right, so now let's finish this sound manager script. So we will need a method to trigger the functionality, right? So if, for example, we go ahead and click on the button, on the play music button, for example, in our settings, then we want to activate music, otherwise we want to deactivate it. So I'm going to call this one music on off, or maybe something like turn music on off, turn music on off. And what this method will do is it checks if the music is turned on. So if getMusic is 1, then we want to enable the background music. Otherwise, we want to disable it. And I have this method that will take care of that. Okay, so we can trigger that by clicking the button later on, and that will do the magic. And then I'll have another one, void turn sound on off, and that one will do all of the sound magic stuff. So basically it will activate everything that needs to be activated for the sound. So UI button click sound is enabled, player hit sound is enabled, and so forth if get sound is turned to 1. Otherwise we disable everything. Okay, now we will of course need to find methods to call those functions in. So the start method will be a good one. So here we can go ahead and use this turn music on off, and then also turn sound on off. And why did I put it in extra functions or methods? Well, because I want to also use that once the buttons are clicked. That's why I will then just reuse this method there. All right. And now in our main menu script, that's where we are going to create 2 methods, which will also take care of our sound. So we have this music on off and this sound on off method, and they take in an integer. And here we have the same thing with the integer. So basically what they do here is they say sound manager, which is this sound manager script. So basically what we do here is we say sound manager dot instance, which is this instance here, our sound manager. There's only one of that. That's the singleton that we use. And then I play the UI button clicked sound. Okay, so here we have this UI button click sound. That's what we're going to play. And then we have the sound manager instance set music. So we set the music. And then the same thing for sound off here, where we just say, okay, UI button click sound should be played. And we have instance set sound. So here we can set the sound directly. So basically we are calling these methods here, set music and set sound. They needed an integer to be activated or not. So basically to set the player preferences. On top of that, what we should do is sound manager dot instance dot and play this method here, or run this method, turn sound off and turn music on off. Okay, so here I'm going to call this turn music on off, and here I'm going to do the same thing with the sound. So sound manager instance turn sound on off. All right, at that point let's save those scripts and go back to Unity. So here, for example, we can double check our background sound and see if play on awake is turned on. That's good. But then we should also turn loop on, because we want this to be constantly running. And at the same time, I'm going to reduce the volume of the background music, so it shouldn't be too strong or too loud. So I'm just going to set that to 0.2. Then you can play around with the pitch and all of the other values. That is fine, as you like it. Now let's also look at the click sound and the general to the other ones. So I'm just going to set that to 0.4, and I need to make sure that there is a click sound here available, or an audio clip. And this one should not be played on awake. So I don't want that to happen. Okay, same here. This should not be played on awake. Otherwise you have a bunch of sounds which will be played on awake, and that will be super annoying. So make sure that you turn this off and set the volume. So display on awake basically just means once you start the application, the sound will be played. You can just test it and you can see how that sounds. If you want to make sure that the sound even works at all, that's a good test. Okay. So then coin collect, same here, 0.4, play on awake is turned on, as well as here. All right, and by the way, this of course should be sound manager script, because we want to have an instance of the sound manager script. And once we call it correctly, then our make singleton should be fine. So now this should work. And in our main menu script, we should also rename that to sound manager script. Add every single one of those steps. It's just a little error that I came across that really breaks our neck here, because with that, none of the following steps will work. And also turn music on off is not accessible because they are not public methods. So I created this method turn sound off and I didn't make it public. So if you want it to be accessible from other classes, you need to make it public, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. Okay, now if I save the script and I save this script, we should be able to use it here. Let's see if we still get any errors here. All right, no more errors, that's gone. And now we can go ahead and go to our canvas, where we are going to now give the button some functionality. So click on one of the buttons, for example, the sound on button, and then scroll down, and here you can drag in the script manager directly, and then you can select its functions that are here. So for example, sound off, sound on, these are the functions that we want to use here. Okay, so here I'm going to run the sound on off function, because that's basically what I do once I click on the on button. Now I just need to make sure that I'm passing the right value, because whatever I enter here is what I'm passing to this function. So the sound on off button function needs to know whether the button is on or off. 1 means on, 0 means off. So because this is the sound on button, we can see that here at the top as well, I should set that value to 1. Now for the sound off button, I'll do the same thing. I'm going to drag the script manager in there, and I'm going to select this sound on off, but this time I'm going to set that to 0. Okay, one of the buttons will activate, the other one will deactivate it. Now the same thing goes for the music on button. I'm going to drag the script manager in there, and then I'm going to select my music on off, and this is the music on button, so it should be set to 1. And now let's go to the music off button. Here I'm going to show you another way to get to this element that we have here. So it's our, what's the name? We have to check it out real quick. Sound, yeah, script manager. So we need to search for script manager in our scene directly. So I'm going to select the script manager, and now I can go to main menu script and select music on off. And here I'm going to pass the value 0. Accordingly, of course, we also have this other stuff going on here. So for example, when I'm on my music off button, I have the music off button text here and the music on button here, and it makes it interactable or not interactable. So those two, they will be moving back and forth. You can see now this time it's the other way around. So here's music on button and here's music off button, and they are inverse to what we have here, or reverse to what we have here. And that's the same for the sound off and on buttons. Okay. So basically only one of them should be activatable at the same time, or active at the same time. And now we need to go to our main menu script, and we need to add some variables here, because I want to be able to access my buttons. So let me add that real quick. You can see now I have my button called music on button, then the button music off button, and so forth, because I want to be able to access them and trigger them from here. Now in the start method, I want to activate one or the other depending on our player preference settings. So let me add that here as well, where I'm saying if player prefs dot get int is music on off equals 1, then we know that our music on button should not be interactable and our music off button should be interactable, because the music is already turned on, so we cannot turn it even more on, we can only turn it off. And that's what we're saying here. Okay, and then we have the same thing for the sound. So we get the integer that we before put there. Okay, we check, is the button, well, is the sound on off 1? If that's the case, make the sound on button not interactable and make the off button interactable. Okay, and where do we get that from? That get int for those two values? Well, we set them in advance. You might recall we set them here, for example, in the start method of our sound manager script, if it's run the first time, and then we change it again once we set the music on or off, and the same for set the sound on or off, because that's where we set the integer in the player prefs. So we basically set the settings to be either on or off depending on what is passed. Okay, now let's save that script because we want to run the script in Unity. And now let's make sure that our main menu script has the right settings. Okay, so here we have it in our script manager. Here is the main menu script, and we need to assign buttons to those fields because these are the buttons that we have set up here. Here at the very top we made them public, so we can now edit them in our Unity editor. Okay, so for example, I can now drag in the music off button to the music off button functionality, or I can just select it from here directly. So here I'm going to search for music and I'm going to select the music on button for the music on button variable. Then the same for the sound on button as well as the sound off button. And now we just need to set the scripts accordingly, or the sound here for the sound manager script accordingly. So we need to go to our sound manager and just drag the elements in there. So for example, background music, I'm going to drag it in there. Then UI button click, I'm going to drag it there, and so forth. Okay, so now you need to assign those ones as well. Okay, and now let's test the application. Let's see if we get any additional errors. Let's turn off the sound and music. So in my case, I cannot hear any music anymore. Let me turn music on again, and I can hear the music again. All right, turning on the sound, you can hear some sound. Now for the click event, that's something that we still need to set up. So let's do that real quick, because the sounds that we want to have is, for example, for the back button. So you can see if I click back, I go back, but there's nothing there yet. But let's just do that real quick. So for example, here the back button, let's give it an on-click event. So I'm just going to drag a sound to here, the UI click sound, and I'm just going to say that it should play it. So audio source, play. Now let's test that. Let's run it and see if the back button actually plays some sound. And it does. So in my case it does, and I hope in your case it does so as well. Now you can assign the same thing for the buttons that we don't see. So the ones in the settings panel are done. Now let's go to the main menu panel and let's give those buttons also the same treatment. So let's open it up, go to the play button, scroll down, add an on-click event here, then go to our project, or actually let's go to the sound manager here and drag that click sound in there. Select source play or audio source play. And now the same thing for the other buttons as well. So here I'm going to assign the UI click. I go to audio source play. Then for the customize button, so drag it in there, audio source play. Same thing for settings. There you have to be careful. So settings, click, and audio source play. And finally the exit button, same treatment. By the way, you can of course select it from the scene as well. So here, if you know the name, you can go to AS underscore and here UI click and select the audio source play. So now let's reactivate the settings panel and deactivate the menu panel and play around with it and test if everything is working. Okay, so that's it for the sound settings. All right, so now let's go ahead and move scenes, because that's something that we can't do yet. We still need to take care of that. So let's go to our assets and go to scenes. So here we can get rid of our sample scene, delete that, and let's create a new scene. So I'm gonna create a scene here, and I'm going to call this one game scene, because this is going to be the scene where we will handle all of our game stuff. Okay, so where we will create a player and the hook and all of that. Now, in order to move from one scene to another, you need to add something to your script. So for example, in the main menu script, I will add a line here at the top saying using Unity engine dot scene management. Okay, this one is required if you want to move from one scene to another. Now, in order to go to another scene, you can simply create a function for that, which will basically just run one line. So in our case, it's going to be this function here, which will call the next scene. You could call this function as well play scene or go to game scene or something like that. I'm just going to call this one next scene call, and it needs the scene index. And what it will then do is it will run the scene manager.load scene method with that scene index. So this method here is available inside of this scene management namespace that we have added. So now we can use this line of code with nothing else that we need to build. So whenever we want to run this, we can run it, and we will do that once we click the play button. So at least that's the goal that I have here. Okay, then I will also add the exit button. So pretty much the same thing. We just add a function here. I'm going to call this one exit call, and this one will quit the application. So you can just say application.quit, and that will then close your whole game or shut it down pretty much. Okay, so now let's integrate those methods to our game. And now let's save this script. So just make sure that it's there, and let's go back to Unity, and here I want the exit button to do something. So I'm going to add another on-click event. So I want to play the sound once it's clicked, but I also want to execute something on top of that. So similar to what we've done here where you had the script manager, now I want to do the same thing with the exit button. So I'm going to drag the script manager here, and then I'm going to go to main menu script and run the, in this case, exit call. So this exit call function. And now let's activate the main menu so that we can actually see the elements here. I'm also going to add a play functionality. So to the play button, I'm going to do the same thing. Let's add an on-click. I'm going to drag the script manager over here and go to main menu script. And this one will be the next scene call. And now what number should I enter here? Well, therefore we need to go to build settings, and we need to drag in all of the scenes that we want to have. Okay, now for example, if I want to move from the main menu scene to the game scene, I need to enter the value 1 here. So for example here, I'm going to enter 1. Now let's build and run that application. Then you can say where you want to store that app. And I'm going to create a new folder here called Bad Game X. Select that folder, and here I'm going to build that. So this will take a little while. And then our game starts. So let me press play. You can see we move over to the other activity, or the other scene. So we cannot see anything here because we don't have anything in the scene. So I just closed it. Let's try the same thing with the exit button. And actually you will find the game in the folder that you have just selected. So in my case, in the Bad Game X, you will now have the Bad Game clone exe file, which you can now execute. And I can press exit, which will close the application. All right, so now you know how to move from one scene to another and how to close your app. Okie dokie, now let's go ahead and add the player to the game. So let's go to the game scene. And here I want to create, first of all, the right position for my camera. So let me set the camera up correctly. So the position should be 0, 0, -10. That's fine. Then the clear flags should be skybox. That's good as well. The background color, well, here I'm going to select 0, 0, 0. So I'm basically going to use a black background. I'm going to set alpha to 255 here. So it's not going to be opaque. And then I will change the size to be 10. Okay, so now we have this bigger size for the camera. And here I'm going to go from 1000 to 100. So the furthest point from the camera that drawing occurs is going to be 100 because we don't want to draw anything that's too far away from the camera. And now we can go ahead and create the player. So I'm going to create an empty object, which will be my player parent. And also what we can do is we can actually create a new game object here, which I'm going to call camera handler. And I'm going to drag the main camera inside of this camera handler. Okay, now our player parent needs to have a script as well. And there are, of course, multiple ways to do that. I'm just going to create a new script right here. And I'm going to call this one player controller, because this is going to be the task of the script. It's going to control the player. So before I open up the script, I'm going to drag it to the player parent. And then I'm going to check out the components that I want to add, because the thing is, this player that I have there, it should have a collision detection. And if you want to have any kind of collision detection, you need to have a rigid body. And because we are in a 2D world, I'm going to select rigid body 2D. Now the collision detection should be super precise. So I will need to change that from discrete to continuous, because I want this to work super well. Then I want to use spring joint 2D. And what spring joint allows us to do is to connect two rigid bodies together, but allow the distance to change. So it's as if they were connected by a spring. So that's basically what the spring joint will do. And we will need to add another rigid body here. So basically the rigid body is a physical body. So we can say we have a physics body here, which can be influenced by gravity, which will have a collision detection. So if something collides with it, it will be influenced by it and so forth. You can also see we have this spring joint here, which connects it to currently the anchor, which is the center of the screen. Now let's go ahead and enable collision for the spring joint, because I want it to be able to collide. So should rigid bodies connected with this joint collide. Okay, I want that. Then I want to auto configure the distance. That's fine as well. The distance should be 0.005. The damping ratio is going to be 0.25. So if you want to ever know more about a specific value here, you can hover over it. So the damping ratio for the oscillation while trying to achieve the specified distance. So I want to have a little bit of damping. You see 0 means no damping, 1 means critical damping, and I have 0.5 or 0.5 as the damping ratio. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a new game object inside of our player parent. And I'm going to call this one player body. Now for the player body, I will add a sprite renderer. So here I'm going to select sprite renderer, and then I need a sprite, so I need an image. You can download the sprites from the resources link, so you can just download them and put them into your assets folder. So make sure that you drag the sprites folder in there, and then you can see you will have a new sprites folder, which we will now use. But basically you could have selected any type of image that you wanted. Okay, so the player body will now have this white image as the sprite renderer here. I'm going to leave everything else as default, but I'm going to add a box collider. So a box collider is a colliding box pretty much. So it allows us to have something that we can collide with. And that's what I want the player to be. So the player should be able to collide with elements within the game. For example, the hooks, so that he can get faster, for example, once he rushes through a hook or something like that. All right, so then I'm going to check the size here, and it's a little small, so I'm going to put it to 111. And actually, when we do that, maybe we should check the size of the player itself. It's all set to 1. I think that should be fine so far. And let's go to the player parent here and set the position to be 0, 0, 0 as well. All right, and now let's go ahead and create another empty object, which I'm going to rename and call platform. So that will be our platform where the player can rest until he then starts the game, or until he needs to start with the action. So I'm going to set that at -2 roughly, so just underneath, and the z value should also be 0. The scale, however, will be 100 to 40. Okay, so I'm going to make it a little bigger. Then here, as the sprite renderer, I want to also have an image here. So I'm going to add a sprite renderer. I'm going to drag the white image here. And you can see this is the block that we have here, which is our platform. And then in order for our player to drop onto this platform and not fall through it, we need to give it a physics body as well. So I'm going to give it a box collider here, box collider 2D. By the way, we should also make sure that our camera handler is repositioned, so we can reset its position to 0, 0, 0, but then the camera will be removed. So let's reposition its position also to 0, 0, 0. Okay, so now the camera will be perfectly centered. And then make sure that your player is, so the parent is positioned at 0, 0, 0, as well as the player body. And now let's go to player parent and scale it up to 25, 25, 25 towards all directions. Now, of course, you can see that the physics body here is way too big. So of our player body, the physics body of having the size of 1 is probably going to be too big. So 0.04 should be a little more precise. And now, of course, for anything to appear, we need to make sure that our main camera's Z position is negative. So here now we should be able to see the elements here, our plateau or platform, and then our player. And you can see at the beginning it's moving a little bit, and that has to do with our spring joint. So now we just need to add functionality that allows us to actually move the player based on our clicked events and everything. Okay, so now let's take care of the hooks. So in order to create hooks, the first thing we should do is save our scene. So it's not gonna go anywhere. So always make sure to save your scene. And now I'm going to create an empty object, and I'm going to call this one hook, because this is going to be my hook. So here I'm going to change its position to 6 and 7. And then the Z position will be 0. Scale should be as it is. And then I will need to add a sprite renderer here, sprite renderer, so that I can see something. And the sprite renderer should have this box here. So I'm going to drag the sprite in there. You can see now we have this little box, and I will change the color a little bit. So it will be a very bright color, super magenta color, something like that. All right. Then the next thing is that we will need to have a collider, because we want to be able to collide with this thing, even if it's just with our mouse, right? Or with our finger. So I'm going to add a box collider 2D here as well, because I want to collide with it. Now the thing is, I can collide with many different things. I can collide with the hook, with the player, with the ground. So I definitely need to create layers for that. So let's go ahead here to layers at the top right side of our hook and click on add layers. And here you can see that the first 7 layers are default layers. They are built in, and now we can create our own layers here as well. And I'm going to create them. I'm going to call this one hook. Then I'm going to create layer 9 as player, and then I want to have the ground as well. So player and ground should be added here. Now I need to make sure that every single element has the right layer. So our hook should have the hook layer. Then the platform should have the ground layer. And our player should have the player layer. So the player parent should be the player. And we're going to say, yes, change the children. Now I also want to have different tags. So for example, you can see there is the player tag, there is a finish, respawn, several tags are available, and usually the default value is untagged, but I want to have different tags available so that I can play around with them later on. So one of them will be enemy hook. Okay, so we will have multiple different hook types. One will be the enemy hook. Then I'll have a tag which is a yellow hook, which is not going to be a enemy hook, and then a green hook, and finally I'm just going to call this one hook. So you could have called this default hook or something like that, but I'm just going to give it those names so that we can play around with those tags later on. Now I want to set up a rope, because I want to be able to connect my player to this hook. And in order to do so, I'm just going to create another empty object here, which I'm going to call line. Very basic. It's just going to be my little line. It's going to be at 0, 0, 0. And as you can see, the settings should stay the same. And now I'm going to add a line renderer. So you can see here, Unity offers me with this option to make a line or create a line with a line renderer. And I'm going to set the width of this line renderer to 0.1. So instead of being 1, I want this to be 0.1. Okay, so here this little value, you need to click in it and you can then change it. So now it will be significantly thinner. Now I will also change the color, because I want it to be a beautiful fixed color. Let me select one, and it should be something like this color here. And you can play around with it actually. So all of it should be this color, the whole thing. And you can select your own color as you like it. Now I will just need a material to display anything. Okay, so let's add that as well. We're going to create several materials. So let's go to our materials folder and create some new materials. So create material, and this one will be my hook. And I'm going to change the shader to sprites default so that we have this sprite look again. Okay, and I'll change the color now. So I'll have this bluish color here, very bright. I don't even know if that's blue even. So that's agua or something like that. Actually, in order to get this color, what you can do is you can do 0, 255, 255. Then I'm going to duplicate that by pressing Ctrl D, or clicking on it, Ctrl D, and I'm going to change this one to platform. And now the platform should have a different color. So I'm going to select the red value of 34, green value of 34 and blue value of 34. So it's going to be this gray color that we have. And then I'm going to duplicate once again. This one will be my player. Let's change its color to 0 to 55 to 55. And let's duplicate that once again. So that one will be my rope. And it should have the same color. Now maybe we should change the hook then, because the player and rope are this color already. So maybe we should do more of a magenta here, which is similar to the magenta that we have there. So here, let me select 255, 0 to 55. Okay, and now let's go ahead and assign those materials. So for example, I'm going to assign the player as the material here. And if we look at it, that seems to be just right. Then we have our line, which I'm going to assign an element here, or our material that we created. Then the platform. So let me drag that in there directly. You can do that as well. And then for the hook, let's do the same thing here. We need to drag in the hook material. Now there's only one thing left to do. So here for this color, we should have it as white. So for our hook, we should keep it white, because then the material will actually do the coloring and not the color that we have assigned to the sprite renderer directly here. Okay, so I'm just gonna assign that like this real quick. Okay, at that point, we can check out the game. We cannot play it yet because we don't have the code that will actually do any magic, but we're going to add that ASAP. Alright, so now comes the part that you probably have waited for, because everything up till now wasn't that fancy or that crazy. We barely wrote any code, and now comes the grappling code. So the code that will allow our player to move over to whatever position we grappled, or the hook that we clicked on. Okay, so let's take care of that, and therefore we created a script which was our player controller script. And as this is a lot of code, I think it makes more sense that I copy and paste the code in step by step and explain you what every single part of the code does. So first of all, we have our namespaces that we are using. Then we are in the player controller class, and inside of this class I want to have a bunch of player properties. So I'm going to create this piece of code which will basically just say I want to have a little text that says player properties, and I want to have elements in here, so objects that I can assign directly in Unity. So the player body with a sprite, and I want to know its position, so I want to get its transform. Then the rigid body, so the physical body of the rigid body or of the player parent, as well as the spring joint of the player parent. Okay, so if I save this script now and I go back to Unity, I will find that my player parent that is assigned, or has this script assigned to itself, should have, there we are, should have this beautiful little entry here where we can now assign a player body, the rigid body of the player, and the spring joint. So we can just go ahead and let's see, we have the box collider here, and actually we have everything interesting here. So we can directly drag the rigid body of the player, so from here, so let's drag it over, then the spring joint, and then we need to drag the player body over here. So it's this element here which has a transform component, so we want to get that transform component in the script. Okay, so these are the player properties that we are going to need. What else are we going to need? Well, we will need to have the rope properties and the hook properties, because we basically want to move the player via the hook to the, or via the rope to the hook. Okay, so we need all of those three. So let's go back to our code and let's add the rope properties, because we need to be able to access them in our code as well. So I have the rope properties now. As you can see, we can use this approach here, which is very beautiful, because then this allows us to see very well what kind of information we are adding there. So we need to have the line of renderer of the connected rope, so we want to show it. We need to have the minimum distance between the rope and the player, and we want to have a reduced distance between the hook and the player, so a certain grab speed, so to speak. Okay, so now let's save this again. Let's go back here, and now you can see, if we go over here, we can see that we now need a line, a min distance, and a grab speed. So the line will be this line here. We can drag the line, render it directly in. Then the minimum distance, well, we can assign that. I'm just going to assign 0.5 as of now. And then we need some more information. Okay, so we need to also get information about the hook. So let's go back to the code. And let's get the hook properties. So I'm just going to take them and put them in here. So the hook properties are the position of the hook that we are currently connected to, so the current hook. And then I need to have the raycast hit to the hook hit. So this will return the hook border point for grappling. So basically this will give us a little ray from our finger which hook we have touched on the screen, or in this case on my PC with the mouse. So once I hit something with the mouse on the screen, it will then try to create a connection to that point, or it will create this raycast hit if I hit anything. If I didn't hit anything, then it will basically return nothing. But if I hit, for example, a hook, then it will return the hook, and then we can start doing all of the magic of connecting the player, or moving the player to the hook. And as you see here, there's no current hook. We can, of course, go ahead and drag this hook in there, but we want to also be able to change that dynamically, right? So that's what we're going to do in the code. So let's go back to the code as of now. You can also see that this is a private variable, so we cannot change it in the Unity editor. So you might have seen it. We couldn't change it in the Unity editor. So we only see the current hook here, but we do not see the private raycast hit, okay, because that will be done programmatically, so to speak. Okay, so in the start method, we can start by saying, are we currently grappling or not? So is grappling boolean false? Well, we set that to false. We have this is grappling variable, so we will need a variable here, which I'm going to private is grappling, which will be a bool. So private bool is grappling. And then I have the position count. So I'm gonna set the line, which is our render line. I'm going to set its position count to 2. So it means 2 points available for the rope. First is the start, and the second is the end point of that rope. Because I don't want to create a rope that goes around corners or anything. I just want to have one long rope, which is just a line pretty much. Okay, now we have this update method, and we will need to do a bunch of magic in that update method. Okay, so let me go over it real quick. We get the mouse down or mouse button down 0, which means the left click. If we get that, then we do the grappling start method. We need to create this method, of course, because we don't have it yet, but we need to create it, and this will have a lot of code in it. Then if it's not the mouse button down, maybe it's the mouse button being pressed or held. Well, that's when get mouse button will be called, and then we do the grappling. So that's another method that we'll need to create in which the actual grappling will run. So here, that's what we're going to add here. And then once we release the button, then the grappling will end, and well, we do the end stuff of the grappling. All right. And here's complaining because I'm missing a closing bracket at one point. By the way, we will also need to make sure that our player is moving. So here I'm going to have another method which will take care just of that. So set player body animation from speed. So set player body is the method that we're going to use for that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start with the set player body. So in this method, we'll do a lot of action. So let's add that here. We set the player body. That's the method that we had here. All right. And here we take the player body local scale, and we create a new vector based on the clamp method. So math clamp. And what the clamp method will do is it clamps the given value between the given minimum float and maximum float values, returns the given value if it is within the min and max range. Okay, so we want to clamp the values here. That's basically what we are doing. And then in there, I will pass two values. So one of them will be a remapped value, and the remap will be another function that we need to create. So you can see this is really where the bread and this is the bread and butter of this whole application. So here we remap the function for remapping the value of the float value. So in a simple example, we have a percentage, let's say we have 250 and 500. Well, 250 out of 500 will be 50%. So that's basically what this remap will return. So in this kind of calculation, that's what it will return. So we have this remap function, which is a little bit complicated, but what we do is we get a value, then we get the from 1 point to 1 point, as well as the from 2 point and 2 point. So this was a little complicated, but overall what we do here is we take the value, we subtract from 1, then we divide that result by 2, 1 minus from 1, and we multiply that with 2, 2 minus from 2, and we then add from 2 in the end. So that's what this remap will do. Okay, now in the clamp method, we say we want to clamp the two values. So based on the remap, to which I pass the magnitude of the velocity. So how fast are we? Then I pass in 0, 20, 1, 1.5. And then to the clamp method, I pass in 1 and 1.5. So this is basically just going to be a vector 3 value. So this is going to be the x value, this is going to be the y value, and this is going to be the z value. So basically I scale something based on those calculations. So these calculations are complicated, and you don't have to fully know how exactly that is done. You can play around with the values here, except you really want to build this all by yourself. But usually what you would do is you would find this kind of code on the internet and you would reuse it. Okay, so this is setting this up all by yourself is quite a challenge, and you need to understand math and physics quite well in order to do that. And for example, Ray Wenderlich, you will find a pretty good explanation on how grappling hooks work in depth. So if you want to really understand it in a super deep level, then you can check out this little guide here. Of course, it's slightly different to what we are doing, because we don't just want to swing around as here the player does, but we actually want to get the player closer. So this is one way how to do the grappling functionality in a slightly different manner. But we want to get the direction of the velocity. So pretty much where is the player moving? So we get the rigid body, we get its velocity, and we normalize it because we are more interested in the direction rather than the actual length, so to speak. So what this normalized will do, it returns the vector with a magnitude of 1. So when normalized, a vector keeps the same direction, but its length is 1. So we are more interested in the direction rather than the actual length of the vector. So that's what we do here. And then we want to get the actual angle, and we store that in the angle variable. So how do we get the angle? By using the aton2 function, to which we will need to get the directions y value, or give the directions y value, as well as the directions x value. And then we multiply that with rate to degree. And that will convert the radians to degrees. That's basically what this rad to degree does. So now we finally have the rotation, or the degree, which we can now assign to the player body rotation. And how do we do that? Well, we use quaternion.angle axis with the angle that we prepared, and as the vector 3, or as the second value of angle axis, I use forward. So I want to move the player forward here. So this creates a rotation which rotates the angle degrees around the axis. So around the vector 3 axis that we are passing. So we are passing the angle that we calculated, and we are giving an axis, in our case, the forward axis. So you have vector 3 up, you have vector 3 down, you have vector 3 forward, which is usually towards the right, and you have vector 3 back, which is towards the left. And we want it to move towards the right. Okay, so as you can see, a lot is going on here. It's rather complicated, so you need to know math quite well in order to understand on a deeper level what's actually going on here. And if you are a mathematician and you really want to share some more details on what's going on here, feel free to do so in the comments. All right, now, of course, the grappling start, grappling hook, or the general grappling functionality, as well as the grappling end, are still missing. And then we, of course, will need to get the nearest hook. So let's add that in a bit. Okay, so now we have the player body. We know how to change its scale and its rotation. But what we also need to make sure, of course, is to do the grappling actually. And therefore, we need to get the nearest hook to where the player has touched the screen. Okay, and therefore I have this pretty extensive method as well. It's not super extensive, but still there is something going on here. So this method here, it will return a transform, which means the nearest hook from the clicked position with collider's transform. So we want to get the transform of the thing that we collided with. So we need to pass in a collider array. So multiple colliders can be in there. And we need to pass in the vector at the clicked position. So we need to tell this get nearest hook method where we clicked on the screen. So this method will be needed once we want to get started with the grappling. So I'll prepare that before we do the grappling. So first of all, we need to get the index, or we assign the index as being 0. Then we set infinity to determine the minimum distance. So we have the distance, which will be math.infinity, which is not real infinity, but it's huge. And then we have float min distance, which will also be math.infinity. And then finding the minimum distance from collider's transform to clicked position. So here with this for loop, that's what we're doing. So we start at 0, and then we go through all of the colliders that we have. In our case, we don't have many colliders, right? So we click on something and usually we just have one collider there, but maybe there are 2 or 3 hooks very close to each other, then we could have multiple colliders. So what it will do is it will set the distance as being vector 3 distance. So here, this method will give you the distance between 2 vectors. So between two positions in the room, pretty much. So colliders at the position I want to get its transform position. So basically, I want to get this part here. So let's say I collided with this hook here, and now I want to get the value of the position of this hook so that I can start knowing, first of all, know which hook I clicked on. So for example, if I copy paste this hook and I move it around a little bit, and I click here, for example, so just in between those two, now it needs to figure out which one of those hooks is the one that I clicked on. So if it's just in the middle, it will never be exactly the middle, but it will just choose one of them. Okay, so it will choose the one that is a little closer. Okay, that's what this method is all about. So this get nearest hook method. Okay, so that's what this for loop will do. It will give us the minimum distance based on the distance that we have gotten here. And that only if the distance that we have is smaller than the minimum distance that we have decided or assigned. And then we set the minimum distance to be the current distance. And we set the index to be, so the index that is relevant for us, that is the position to which we want to move, will be I. Okay, so let's say we had those two elements as we just had, and what we do here is we basically compare the two with each other, and we just see which one of the two is closer to the player or to the click where we actually clicked. So that's what this code does, and it checks it, and then it just returns the index of the hook that was closer to our button click or to our mouse click. Okay, so then what we can do here is we can return the collider's transform position, so the one that we actually clicked on and that is the closest to the click. Okay, so that's what this does. Okay, so now the super magic comes into play. Our start grappling method. So here a lot is going on as well, even more. So first of all, we set the is grappling to true. So we had this variable here at the very beginning, which was this private boolean, which we started to false once we started the game, or once the player controller was created. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to set that to true. Then we get the click position with the reduced camera distance. So we just need to get the position and we need to make sure that we calculate it correctly. So we say camera main screen to world point input position plus vector forward 10. So that's basically the value. This 10 is the value of the camera. So if we go to our camera here, so the main camera, you can see that the Z value is -10 backward. So it's going towards us it's pretty much getting out of the screen towards our direction. Okay, so here, let's look at that. So now you can see that the camera is pointing in this direction, right? So this is the distance between the camera and this line where our elements are, is this -10. So we need to move 10 forward to get the actual position on where we touch the screen, because we are comparing it to the camera itself, right? And the camera needs to have the right calculations, and in order to do so, we need to position it for the calculation just at the point where we also have of all of our elements. Okay, because otherwise it's a perspective challenge or a perspective error pretty much. Okay, so that's why we need to get the screen to world point. So wherever we clicked on the screen, and it's cleaned based on vector forward 10. Okay, so if you didn't have -10 as your camera position, then you would have to change this here as well. Then we have a colliders variable, which will store the colliders which overlap the area. Then we have the hooks within the overlap circle. So we get the colliders physics to the overlap circle. So we have a certain circle at the click position. So wherever we touch the screen, where we say, okay, we want to have a position, and we look at things which have the mask called hook. So which have the layer mask called hook. And we have this little radius of 25. So if we go back here, let's say I clicked here, and then there's this little radius around where I clicked, and then it checks is something called hook in this radius. And by called hook, I mean, has it the layer hook? So is it in the hook layer? And if that's the case, then that will be the nearest element that we have found pretty much. Okay, so that's what this overlap circle all gives us. And then we can get the current hook based on the nearest hook, based on the colliders which come from the overlapping circle. So there could be multiple colliders or multiple hooks in the circle that we are looking at. So the bigger I make this one, the more elements I have within the circle. So you could make this a global variable if you wanted to, and you could play around with this value directly. So there's something you could add here towards the top and make it public so you can change it. But I'm just going to keep it a magic number as of now. But as you know, you can change that anytime. And then I'm just using this as the current hook. So which is the nearest hook based on the colliders on the click position where we clicked the screen. And if there is no hook, then I'm just saying is grappling is set to false, and I get out of this method. So I'm just finishing the grappling start method straight away. And otherwise, I say I want to have a hook hit. So what is hook hit? It is our private raycast variable that we created here. So this raycast hit 2D. So that one is going to be the hook hit, and we get that by using physics 2D raycast, we need to pass in the position of the element, in our case the player controller, and then the current hook position minus the transform position, so minus the position of where we are, that value normalized, so we get another direction pretty much. Then I assign 100 as the maximum distance, and I only look at elements that have the layer hook or that are in the layer mask hook. Okay, so if you want to know very specifically what raycast does, you can of course always check out the documentation, because Unity has an amazing documentation, and there you can find out more about that. So here, raycast needs the origin vector, it needs the direction, it needs the distance. So usually the default is math infinity, so it will just look for raycast hits anywhere in the whole game, but I limited it to 100. So I just said, okay, no more distance than 100. Then we have the layer mask, and you have some more values that you can assign, but they have defined values or default values, so you don't need to assign them. So they are optional. Okay, so that is all of the stuff that I have passed here. I passed in the mask, and now I will know the hook that I hit. And I want to get the hook point, so where is that? And I want to assign that to be the connected anchor of our spring joint. Now, what is our spring joint? It's this spring joint here, which is this player property. So if we go back here, we go to our player, and we can see that we have a spring joint, which is basically this thing that constantly is connecting our player to a certain position. But now I want this position to be the hook, so that our player is constantly being dragged towards that hook. So it's like a, yeah, it's like a spring joint. That's pretty much the idea. So it's like a spring. It's connecting them. Okay, pulling them together. So it's going to pull the player to the hook that we clicked on. Okay, so then we enable that spring joint, because otherwise we want to disable it, because otherwise we have this weird flimsy behavior of our player. It will move back and forth, but I only want it to be enabled as long as we are connected to that hook, or as long as we click on the hook. And the line should also be enabled so that we can actually see the line renderer, or we can actually see the rope, so to speak, that connects the player to the hook. Okay, so this was a little bit of code, but I hope that I made myself clear enough on how all of that works. Okay, so now the next step will be to take care of what's happening while the grappling is going on. So I'm going to create another method here, the grappling method, and the grappling method needs to have the 2 points of the line. So I need to set the position, which will be 0, and the transform position, which means the position of the player. And then I will set the position to be 1, and at the position 1, I have the point of the hook. So wherever I hit the hook, that's where I want to connect the line to, or our rope to. So basically these two lines say, okay, create a direct line between those 2 points. And then I get the distance for my spring joint based on the spring joint distance, the minimum distance, and the delta time grab speed. So grab speed is another variable that we have assigned here. So we created a little range where we said the grab speed will be by default 1. But in the settings, we can play around between 0.1 and 5, so that we can only create use rather realistic values. And you can see also here the minimum distance is a rope property that we had before, so we need to assign that as well. And that is basically what's happening here. And now we have this rb.velocity, which we multiply with itself and 0.995. What does that mean? Well, that means that the speed of our player will be reduced with every single frame, or with every single time that grappling, this method here, is called. Okay, and as it is called in the update function here, it will be called many times as long as we click on the element, okay? So as long as we click on the hook itself. Okay, so now we have one last method left to do for us to finally test it, because this was a long piece of code that we needed to go through, but I wanted to really make clear what's going on. And I think there's only one part where I wasn't super good at explaining it. That was probably this remap stuff. So maybe I should add a little bit of a file where you can read a little more information about that. But now let's go to the grappling end. So here we are doing very basic things. We just say is grappling is false. So we're not currently grappling anymore, which means we're not touching the screen, and we shouldn't be catapulted to the hook, and the hook line that we have there shouldn't be there, and so forth. We deactivate the spring joint. So we disable it. We say enable is false. We make the line renderer inactive as well, so we don't have any line anymore that will be rendered, and we reset the line points position. Okay, so now let's save the script because it's a long script and there's a lot of code going on. So now let's go back to our game and let's create some hooks here and drag them around a little bit. So I'm going to move this hook here. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to move it a little bit around. So now you can just play around with the hook positions and just see how you prefer it. You can have even more hooks, so it really depends on what you want to have. Okay. And now the moment of truth has come. Is it gonna work? I really hope so, because the code worked before, so it should work. So there we are. Our figure is stuck there, or a player. But now you see, once I click onto something, you can see it creates this little connection here, this little rope, and it connects very quickly at the beginning, you can see, and then it gets slower and slower every time. And once I release the click, then the rope disappears straight away. You see that? So that is basically our grappling functionality. A lot of code, good stuff, but now it's working. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Now you can play around with this game as it is now, and this is just the first part of the whole game. There will be, of course, a lot more coming. So for example, we still need to add hooks dynamically. We need to create a game over condition, a score condition. We will add a lot more. Okay, but that's it for the grappling feature, and we have this cool little effect here.